SEAL Colonel Ridicules, 12-year-old's range request until she broke every SEAL shooting record. Do you really think a 12-year-old girl can outshoot every SEAL on this base? Avery A.J. Jackson's heart pounded so loudly it felt like it echoed off the concrete walls of the officers' club. The moment Colonel William Bill Rutherford sneered at her leather shooting case, A.J. remembered her mother's words. Strength comes from knowing who you are. Now surrounded by senior officers and curious glances, she had to prove it. The January fog hung low over Naval Station Norfolk as A.J. and her father, Marcus Jackson, wound their way through the manicured grounds toward the club. Each step reminded her of the weight she carried, the legacy of her mother, a decorated Marine sniper whose record still stood unbroken in secret Pentagon files. Her fingers brushed the trident pendant at her throat, its edges worn smooth from years of memory. Marcus lifted his gaze, worry in his dark eyes. Remember, kiddo, you only need to shoot once to show them. But you decide if you want to go through with this. A.J. swallowed past the lump in her throat. Every time she inhaled, she felt the calm her mother taught her in sniper school, the 4-count breathing drill that centered her spirit. I'm ready, Dad. The club's heavy doors loomed ahead, and with one steady breath she walked in. Inside the world was a swirl of polished shoes, crisp uniforms, and the scent of strong coffee. Colonel Rutherford's booming laugh cut through the chatter. Even from across the room, his disdain was palpable. Look at that, he barked, pointing at A.J.'s case. Who let this little girl think she belongs in here? A hush fell as everyone waited for the punchline. A.J. lifted her chin, her voice so calm it unnerved them. Sir, I belong wherever I can prove my aim. A ripple of surprise passed through the assembled officers. Lieutenants. Emily Wong, the range safety officer, exchanged a glance with Master Chief Andre Robinson. Both knew this was no ordinary child. As the laughter died down, Marcus intercepted Rutherford. Colonel, there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter isn't here to play. Save it, civilian. Rutherford cut him off, eyes flashing. This isn't a playground. A.J. felt a flicker of anger, but held herself together. She had trained for years in backyard fields and abandoned warehouses, honing every aspect of her technique. Watching Rutherford dismiss her family's service stung, but she turned it into fuel. Then from the crowd, Dr. Sarah Perez stepped forward, her clipboard in hand. Colonel Rutherford, if Miss Jackson meets all safety and technical requirements, there's no regulation preventing her from using the range under supervision. Rutherford's lips curled. Fine. If she's so confident, let's test her. 5 rounds, 25 meters iron sight, supported position. We'll see how real her talent is. A.J. nodded. Her breath slowed. The pendant at her throat warmed against her skin, a heartbeat, reminder that she carried her mother's courage. As she moved toward the exit, Litwang caught her eye. You ready? She whispered. A.J. offered a small smile. More than ever. Outside the courtyard was filled with curious onlookers. The fog seemed to part for her, as if the world itself held its breath. A.J. touched the leather case again and thought of her mother's final gift, a letter she'd never opened until this morning, tucked inside with the pendant. The words she'd read last night echoed in her mind. Trust your instincts always. Now standing at the threshold of precision point range, A.J. inhaled the cold air, tightened her gloves, and stepped forward, knowing that the next few seconds would determine if a little girl could redefine what strength looked like in a world built for warriors. And as the first shot rang out, everything changed. Did you just hear that every SEAL on this base just went silent? As the echo of the rifle shot faded, Avery A.J. Jackson let the moment stretch. Her chest rose and fell not with fear but with purpose. The single crack of her M16 had cut through fog and skepticism alike. On the 25-meter lane, a perfect bullseye hung like a challenge to every doubter in the crowd. Colonel Rutherford's jaw clenched as he shoveled his coffee into his mouth, trying to mask how rattled he was. A.J. faced the target with steady calm, her mother's trident pendant pressed against her sternum, a pulsing reminder of everything she carried inside. Her father Marcus hovered just behind the firing line, hands slick with adrenaline. He knew this shot meant more than record-breaking precision. It was a statement, a reckoning with prejudice, a protest against the assumption that a civilian girl couldn't hold her own against trained warriors. Yet as her eyes flicked to the audience, Master Chief Andre Robinson, Dr. Sarah Perez, Lieutenant Emily Wong, it wasn't their approval AJ sought. It was her own proof that she could live up to a legacy forged by a Marine sniper mother whose sacrifices had been cloaked in secrecy. Suddenly, Lieutenant Wong called out report group size range. AJ's reply was measured 1-inch group iron sights, supported position. A low murmur rose. 1 inch at 25 meters wasn't beginner's luck. It was mastery. She paused only a heartbeat before the next order, execute 5-round qualifier. Every muscle in her body tensed and relaxed in disciplined anticipation. Her finger met the cold trigger with a familiar ease, her eyesight piercing through the iron sights like a hawk on the hunt. The symbolic weight of the trident once forged from her mother's decommissioned submarine hull felt heavier as each round found its home on the steel target. But Colonel Rutherford wasn't done. His voice a harsh rasp cut across the range. One shot doesn't prove anything. Let's see what you can do when the pressure mounts. The social conflict crackled in the air, ageism, sexism, racial bias all wrapped into a single sneer. AJ understood that his challenge wasn't about marksmanship. It was about maintaining a hierarchy that never imagined someone like her could topple it. When the final 5 rounds rang out, she didn't flinch. Yet a sudden gust of wind rippled the range flags, skewing her usual read of mirage patterns. Her heart skipped, but she adjusted on the fly. No one had seen a child compensate for coastal thermals as quickly. Twist logic, what was meant to expose her weakness, became the moment she proved her adaptability. The spatter of indentations on the target formed not just a group, but a constellation of defiance. As Lieutenant Wong peered through her spotting scope, her voice quivered, group size 1.5 inches. Expert level. The crowd exhaled shock, rippling through rigid uniforms. AJ slung her rifle, her calm gaze meeting her father's proud, teary eyes. Yet before celebration could bloom, a hush fell, thunder's first drop before a storm. A distant drone awakened the courtyard, and every head turned skyward. Naval Station Norfolk's peace shattered by the hum of Pentagon clearance codes. Higher authority was inbound, and whatever landed next would change everything. Are you sure you want her to try 300 meters? The question cut through the tense silence, like a warning shot. Colonel Rutherford's smirk barely hid his dread as he scanned the assembled officers. Avery A.J. Jackson stood at the edge of the extended range, her breath slow and steady. The morning fog had lifted, revealing a perfect California sky, but the coastal thermals were becoming unpredictable. This was no playground. This was a proving ground for warriors. AJ tightened her gloves and pressed a hand against the leather case at her side, feeling the familiar grooves of her mother's trident pendant against her palm. It wasn't just a charm. It was a legacy forged in submarine steel and baptized in sacrifice. Her mother had taught her to read wind flags like maps and to treat every gust as a clue, not a threat. Now, under the gaze of Navy brass, every lesson would be tested. Marcus Jackson watched from behind the safety line, anxiety etched in every line of his face. He remembered the day his wife first strapped that pendant around AJ's neck and whispered, "Remember, strength is knowing who you are." Those words had guided AJ through lonely training nights in abandoned warehouses, and now they guided her across this valley. Lieutenant Emily Wong gave the final safety briefing. Rifle is zeroed at 200 meters. Adjust elevation plus 6 clicks for 300. Wind flags show left to right drift at 4 miles per hour. Proceed when ready. The numbers were AJ's script, but the stage felt unfamiliar under the weight of expectation and hidden prejudice. Every doubter's gaze bore into her a reminder that she was a black civilian girl, facing down a system that had never imagined her in this arena. She slung the bolt-action rifle, the same model her mother had used, onto the sandbag rest and settled into position. Her cheek welded to the stock she inhaled on a 4-count fill settle-hold press. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the distant silhouette of the steel target. For a moment, doubt flickered. What if a bird drifted across the shot? What if a tiny mirage shift masked the bullseye? Then she felt the pendant warm against her chest like a heartbeat beneath her skin. She exhaled the fear and squeezed the trigger. The crack was louder at this range, an echo of history and hope. A low murmur spread as the spotter's scope revealed the shot. Dead center. Colonel Rutherford's eyes darted away, unwilling to meet hers. But he recovered quickly. One shot proves nothing. 5 rounds, same group size. Let's make this interesting. AJ nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. She reloaded with methodical precision, each round a testament to discipline over instinct. Round 2, another center strike. Round 3, a whisper of wind rippled the flags, forcing her to compensate. .2 mil, write a calculation she made in her head faster than any computer. That shot held true. Round 4, a distant gull cried overhead, but her focus never faltered. She recalled her mother's lecture on distraction. When everything screams, your mind must whisper calm. She pressed the final shot, and the target smiled back with 5-round group measuring 1.5 inches at 300 meters expert sniper territory, regardless of age or background. A hush fell. Master Chief Andre Robinson stepped forward, voice thick. Miss Jackson, that group exceeds our advanced qualifications. Dr. Sarah Perez's eyes glistened as she scribbled notes on stress resilience. Even Lieutenant Wong's posture betrayed pride. But Colonel Rutherford stood frozen, his world upended by a civilian child rewriting the rules. Before he could muster a response, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors rolled in, growing louder by the second. The entire range pivoted skyward, hearts pounding. Authority from above had arrived, and its intentions would reshape everything AJ thought she knew about legacy justice and belonging. Hands off her, Colonel. She's under my command now. The command deck officer's voice crackled over the handheld radio just as the helicopter's skids settled onto the range's landing pad. AJ Jackson froze mid-step, heart hammering in her chest like a war drum. Above the thin haze of rotor wash, Admiral Carolyn Wells emerged, silver hair pinned back in a regulation bun, uniform pristine, despite the dust swirling at her feet. Her presence was a promise of accountability, an authority that rose above rank and prejudice alike. AJ felt the trident pendant warm again against her sternum, as if her mother's spirit whispered reassurance. She stood ramrod straight, every muscle coiled with readiness. Admiral Wells scanned the scene, Colonel Rutherford's rigid posture, lit Emily Wong's respectful salute, Master Chief Andre Robinson's guarded nod, and then her gaze found AJ children weren't supposed to own that kind of calm under fire, let alone triumph over elite operators. AJ drew a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the cool January air fill her lungs and empty her doubts. Miss Jackson, Admiral Wells said, voice both firm and curious, I hear you've been busy demonstrating why regulations alone can't define capability. A murmur ran through the officers. Here was someone who understood that systems like the one that had tried to dismiss a black civilian girl could be rewritten by true merit. AJ swallowed, her throat dry. Yes, ma'am. I only want to honor my mother's legacy and prove the system wrong. Wells offered a small, understanding smile. Your mother was a remarkable Marine sniper, classified operations commendations that never made the public roll call. The words struck like hail against AJ's ribs. Classified, hidden, just like her own potential had been until today. My grandmother, Wells continued, has been watching from afar, ensuring your path remained protected. You carry her courage and her aim. At that moment, 2 staff officers led forward a tall, dignified woman in civilian attire, Chief Warrant Officer Margaret Jackson, AJ's grandmother, whose very existence had been erased from official records. Time seemed to slow as AJ took in the resemblance, same steady eyes, the same confident tilt of the chin. All the whispers of only children should stick to dolls felt like distant thunder now. AJ's voice trembled. Grandma. Her word was a key, turning in a lock that had never fully opened. Margaret's gaze softened the weight of decades of sacrifice, clear in the set of her shoulders. Eat your heart out, Colonel Rutherford, she said under her breath, enough for AJ to hear. We're rewriting these rules together. Rutherford's face went from defiance to disbelief. He glanced at Admiral Wells, who gave a curt nod. Colonel, you've seen Miss Jackson's performance. Now you'll see her lineage. We have work to do, reforms to implement. The social friction crackled as Rutherford's authority was quietly superseded by familial bond and institutional conscience. AJ felt a rush of triumph, but also of responsibility. This was bigger than one girl's shot. It was a reckoning for an entire system built on exclusion. Margaret stepped forward, her presence as commanding as any officer's. She placed a steady hand on AJ's shoulder. Time to take this home, sweetheart. AJ met her grandmother's eyes, the trident pendant gleaming between them. The symbol of legacy now lit a path forward, not just for herself, but for every overlooked talent tethered to outdated rules. As Admiral Wells issued orders to convene a policy review board on the spot, AJ understood that the next battle wouldn't be on the firing line, it would be in the corridors of power. And the real target was injustice itself. Did you really think I'd stop after one victory? Avery A.J. Jackson's voice rang out across the hastily convened conference room, where top brass and policy wonks clustered around folding tables piled high with printed regulations and red-lined memos. The morning's adrenaline still pulsed through her veins as she faced down Admiral Wells and Colonel Rutherford, her grandmother Margaret Jackson by her side, like a fortress. This was the moment when an entire military institution had to decide, would they bury her story or build a new path forward? The room was a swirl of debate, some fearing a breakdown of tradition, others bristling at the injustice AJ's demonstration had exposed. Admiral Wells cleared her throat. We need actionable recommendations by week's end. I want revised policies on range access, merit recognition regardless of age, race, or civilian status. And I'll need your input, Miss Jackson. AJ felt the weight of the request settle on her shoulders, heavier than any rifle. It wasn't enough to prove her own worth. Now she had to fight for everyone who'd ever been underestimated. She touched the trident pendant at her throat and thought of her mother's last letter. Use your strength to open doors, not just to walk through them. As advisors scribbled frantic notes, AJ spoke with measured conviction. First, we need transparent criteria for civilian participation in specialized training. No more secret back channels or patronage. Second, heritage programs that identify talent by lineage, like my grandmother's unit, must include outreach to underrepresented communities. Third, create mentorship tracks, pairing veterans with young shooters, ensuring skills and values pass on openly, not behind closed doors. Even Colonel Rutherford nodded grudgingly. He'd seen the data, and he couldn't ignore the precision of her proposals. Ariel Riel Thompson, a young attorney in military affairs and herself a former marksmanship instructor, stood up. These changes will require budget reallocation and legislative approval. We'll need to pilot them at a few installations. AJ recognized the familiar maze of bureaucracy, the very thing that could strangle progress. Then let Norfolk be the first, she said, voice steady. If it works here, it works everywhere. Riel gave an approving smile. You've got yourself a test case. Meanwhile, Margaret Jackson watched her granddaughter with pride and concern. She leaned in and whispered, "Remember, politics is a different battlefield. Stay true to your values." AJ nodded, feeling the cool metal of the pendant like a lifeline. The twisted logic of this system had underestimated her at every turn, but she had learned to turn each slight into fuel. Now she would take the spin of red tape and forge it into change. As the meeting adjourned, Colonel Rutherford approached her with uncharacteristic humility. Miss Jackson, I owe you an apology and my support. AJ locked eyes with him, gauging sincerity. She said, Actions speak louder than words, Colonel. I hope to see you at the range on equal footing. He offered a stiff salute that felt like a promise. Walking out into the courtyard, AJ breathed in the crisp air. The naval flags snapped overhead, each stripe a reminder of unity forged through diversity. She turned to her grandmother. "What's next?" Margaret smiled, her eyes shining with legacy and hope. "We build this world together, one rule at a time." And as they strode toward the gates of Naval Station Norfolk, a delivery truck rumbled past carrying new prototype rifles, labeled Jackson Model, the first symbol of systemic change born from one girl's courage. But a distant rumble hinted at storms yet to come, and AJ knew this was only the beginning. "Watch your back, Commander. This isn't just a training session anymore." AJ Jackson's voice carried over the courtyard as she squared her shoulders, the new Jackson Model rifle resting lightly against her hip. The prototype's matte black frame bore a subtle engraving of her mother's trident symbol, a reminder that every innovation here was born of legacy and resistance to the status quo. Today marked the inaugural community showcase of the revised marksmanship program at Naval Station Norfolk, an event where civilians, recruits, and senior officers would all train side by side. AJ felt her heart thrum in anticipation. This was the true test, not a single shot on a sealed range, but building trust and skill across divides. The sun drifted low, gilding the assembled crowd, young cadets in crisp blues, local teens from underrepresented neighborhoods, clutching borrowed rifles, and onlookers in business suits. At the head of the line stood AJ, flanked by Lunt Emily Wong and Margaret Jackson, her grandmother, whose stern gaze softened when she caught AJ's eye. "Remember," Margaret had whispered this morning, "change happens when people feel included, not just awed." AJ tucked that truth into her gut as she called out the first drill target transitions at 50 meters steel plates, resetting with a metallic ping. A local boy, Jamal, stepped up nervously. He was 15, one of the community outreach cadets, and his hands shook visibly as he shouldered the prototype. AJ moved behind him, hand on his shoulder, her voice low but firm. "Focus on the fundamentals: breath, stance, sight alignment. Let the trident guide you." The symbol blazed in Jamal's eyes as he exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The plate flipped. The cheers were immediate. AJ felt a swell of pride for Jamal, for herself, for every barrier she was chipping away. But not everyone celebrated. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Commander Peterson, a career officer who'd publicly questioned civilian involvement, walk away with a frown. A twist logic formed in her mind. Skepticism often masks fear of losing control. She let it fuel her resolve, rather than derail her focus. Next, she guided a group of midshipmen through wind-read drills, demonstrating how to interpret the coastal breeze, less a hindrance, more a partner in precision. The ones who laughed yesterday now watched with keen interest as their hits tightened into neat clusters. Midway through, a sudden commotion rippled through the crowd, a staff car screeched to a halt, and a media crew spilled out cameras swiveling toward AJ. The Department of Defense had leaked news of Norfolk's pilot program nationally. Their story was no longer local. AJ had expected attention, but not this early. She raised a hand to still the noise. "This is about empowerment," she announced, voice steady, under flashing lights. "We're proving that talent and training belong to everyone, regardless of age, race, or rank." The trident on her rifle caught the golden hour light, throwing a sharp reflection that danced across her grandmother's proud face. For a beat, the world hushed around her soldiers, civilians' press united by a single moment of possibility. Then the microphones thrust forward questions flying about scaling the program funding and whether civilians should really wield military-grade equipment. AJ answered each with the same unshakable conviction. "Inclusion is not weakness. It's our greatest strength." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the final plate flipped for the last drill, and the crowd erupted in applause. AJ lowered her rifle, her chest tight with triumph and the weight of responsibility she'd chosen. But over the roar, she caught a whisper from Lytton Wong. "Commander Peterson is calling for an urgent meeting. He wants answers. And fast." A flicker of unease rippled through AJ. The real battle was just beginning, and this time the target was the heart of the institution itself. "Do you see whose name is etched here? Avery, AJ. Jackson's voice cracked across the stands of precision point range as she pointed to the gleaming brass plaque at the foot of the podium. The inscription read, 2026 International Marksmanship Invitational Junior Range Safety Officer, A.J. Jackson. Gasps rippled through the crowd of world-class marksmen, uniformed officers, and civilian competitors. A 12-year-old girl had just been entrusted with running the very competition she'd shattered stereotypes to enter. 6 months had passed since Naval Station Norfolk's pilot program went live. What began as a local experiment had grown into a global phenomenon. Elite shooters from the U.S., Germany, the UK, Japan, and Australia now trained under the Jackson model, a rifle bearing her mother's trident symbol engraved over the handguard to remind every competitor of legacy resilience and unity. AJ paced the firing line before the opening ceremony, feeling the trident pendant's familiar weight against her sternum, as though her mother's spirit lent strength to her every step. Morning Miss Jackson called Sergeant Lucia Müller from the German team, her English thick with accent and admiration. Never thought I'd learn wind mirage techniques from someone half my age. AJ offered a grin, heart-swelling. The social conflict she'd once faced, ageism, sexism, racial stereotyping, was being rewritten in real time, replaced by a mutual respect born of shared passion for precision. Yet she knew not everyone was as eager to evolve. At the far end, Commander Peterson watched with narrowed eyes. He'd questioned the civilian program back at Norfolk's pilot now, lords over budget allocations. AJ locked eyes with him, her gaze unwavering. Sometimes leadership is recognizing talent, not suppressing it. She took a deep breath, recalling her grandmother Margaret's counsel. Authority is earned by lifting others up, not pushing them down. With that, she signaled for the opening shot. Competitors lined up at 50 meters free rifle stage, each following AJ's demonstration of stance, breath control, and sight picture. As the first shot rang out, the wind flags danced, and AJ called the drift adjustment through the PA system. Mid-shot, a sudden gust twisted a flag 45 degrees off its axis, threatening to throw a cluster wide. Twist logic, what seemed like sabotage by nature, became an opportunity. She instructed everyone to calculate a half-click less than protocol. The entire field tightened their groups. A ripple of astonished applause swept the line. Between stages, Admiral Wells and Margaret Jackson approached, their expressions beaming. "You've created something extraordinary," Wells said. But AJ spotted the catch in Wells's eyes. Funding battles loomed at the Pentagon once the media attention faded. Margaret squeezed her hand. "Legacy isn't a moment, it's endurance. Keep pushing." The final stage loomed 300-meter rapid-fire duels. As AJ oversaw safety checks and target resets, her phone buzzed in her pocket. An encrypted message from her grandmother secured the original trident pendant. "They're coming for it." A shiver ran down her spine. The symbol that had united so many might now be targeted by those threatened by change. She slipped the pendant into her pocket, forging a new resolve she would protect what her mother fought to leave behind, even as she led the world's greatest marksman to new heights. The starter's flag unfurled, and the courtyard fell silent. AJ drew another breath, the weight of legacy, and the promise of the future settling in her bones. This was more than a competition. It was a test of everything she stood for. And as the first rapid-fire crack echoed, she realized the real battle wasn't about bullets or medals, but about safeguarding hope itself. "Promise me you'll never let this fall into the wrong hands." Avery A.J. Jackson whispered to her grandmother as the final awards ceremony wound down beneath the setting sun. The crowd, world-class shooters, military brass community leaders, had just watched the climax of the 2026 International Marksmanship Invitational. A 12-year-old civilian had not only upheld the legacy of her mother's trident, but had become its guardian. Yet that moment of triumph felt like the calm before a new storm. AJ had just stepped off the podium, her polished black Jackson model rifle re-slung over her shoulder. Its engraved trident glinted under the floodlights, a beacon of unity and resistance, against an old guard that once wrote her off. As she weaved through clusters of admirals and ambassadors giving congratulatory handshakes, she caught Commander Peterson's steely glare. He approached, voice low enough for only her ear. "This symbol you carry, it's more powerful than you know. Expect pressure to give it up, or bury the program." His words were a challenge: protect her mother's legacy, or watch it be co-opted by the very institution she'd forced to change. Inside, AJ's heart thundered. She thought of the trident pendant her grandmother had slipped into her pocket before the final rapid-fire stage, a family heirloom forged from submarine steel, marked by every one of her mother's triumphs and sacrifices. That pendant had guided her through the darkest doubts and into the brightest victories. Now it was more than a memory. It was an inheritance worth fighting for. She squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. Every lesson her mother had taught, from four-count breathing to ethical responsibility, came flooding back like a tide. Across the courtyard, Master Chief Andre Robinson called her name. He motioned toward an unmarked tent where journalists and diplomats were gathering for a last reception. "They want your story on record," he said, voice warm with pride. "Don't let them rewrite it." AJ nodded, weaving between uniformed attachés and camera crews. Inside, Admiral Wells waited, arms crossed, but expression approving. "Your victory has inspired policy drafts in 5 countries," Wells said quietly. "But influence without vigilance is fleeting. Are you ready to be the voice that keeps us honest?" AJ met her gaze. "I won't let the symbol become empty rhetoric. I'll keep fighting for every kid who's been told they don't belong." A hush fell as Margaret Jackson stepped into the tent, eyes shining behind neat frames. She handed AJ the pendant in its velvet box. "This belongs to you now," she said softly, "and to every person who sees their future in your reflection." AJ opened the box, the trident's edges reflecting her resolve back at her. She slid it around her neck, feeling the weight of generations settle like armor. In that moment, the twist logic of her journey crystallized. What began as a child's quest to honor her mother had become a movement to redefine strength, inclusion, and legacy itself. As the first stars blinked overhead, AJ stepped outside the tent into the cool night air. She held the pendant between her fingers, the engraved trident, a beacon against the dark. Around her, conversations hummed, debates on funding, outreach, international cooperation. But she knew the real work started now, guarding justice with the same precision she used on the range. "Who's with me?" she called softly, voice carrying into the night. A small circle formed, veterans, community leaders, fellow young marksmen, each nodding. AJ tightened her grip on the pendant and looked skyward at the silent constellations. The future shimmered beyond reach, an open target waiting to be struck. And for the first time, she saw not just her own path, but a constellation of paths illuminated by that enduring trident,